So I think this is really going to be a revelation to a lot of people who didn't live through this period and aren't particularly conversant with this history. But what we're talking about, Stan, is it's 1942 or 43. Pearl Harbor's happened. We've declared war on Germany and Japan, and we're in this pitched battle. And the Roosevelt administration is actually interested in getting communists into the government.
Well, certain elements. You got to remember, and we know it now, and it was true then. There are all kinds of different contending factions going on. There's a quote in here, I won't bore you with it in great detail, but it really sums it up, I think, pretty well as to how and why this recruitment of communists occurred. And there was a guy, this was actually came out in the case of J. Robert Oppenheimer, who was a security risk and a communist, by the way. It was shown in my book, who was the subject of hearings and so forth in the 50s when they finally got him out. But in those hearings, a man named Colonel John Lansdale actually testified for Oppenheimer, but he was also testifying about some of the background. And Lansdale's testifying. He said, during the war, he was subject to pressure, quote, from military superiors, from the White House, and from every other place, because I dared to stop the commissioning of 15 or 20 identified communists. I was being vilified, reviewed, and re-reviewed by boards because of my efforts to get communists out of the Army, and being frustrated by the blind, naive attitude of Mrs. Roosevelt and those around her in the White House.
Now, what year was that?
That was testified to in 1954, but he's testifying about what happened in the war.
Back in like 43.
He's testifying in 54 about stuff that happened in 43, 44, 45.
So actually the official policy of the White House at that time
to get communists in.
Was to keep communists in the Army.
Yes. Here's, if I may quote further, there was a regulation then in force and the war started, which barred communists from jobs as radio operators on merchant vessels. Mm-hmm. And the reason for that being this was a source of strategic and military transmission of data and a sensitive job. That prohibition was reversed on the suggestion of a person named Adlai Stevenson, who later ran for president of the United States. But in 1942, 10 years before he ran for president, Adlai Stevenson was an assistant to the Secretary of the Navy. And he sent a memo to the secretary, a man named Frank Knox, saying the following, asking whether identification with communism is sufficient grounds to disqualify a man without some further evidence of incompetence, just because he's a communist. And so his superiors thought that was a good idea, and so the prohibition was removed. And it was explained this way. The secretary, Frank Knox, said he had no brief for the activities of the Communist Party, but the president had stated that considering the fact that the United States and Russia were allies at this time, and that the Communist Party were now bent toward our winning the war, the United States was bound not to oppose the activities of the Communist Party, and specifically to not disapprove the employment of any radio operator for the sole reason that he was a member of the Communist Party or that he was active in communist affairs.
This is President Roosevelt?
This is Frank Knox saying this about President Roosevelt.
That it was the direct policy of President Roosevelt that communists could even be in the signals operation of the U.S. military.
Well, this specific order concerned radio operators on merchant vessels.
Okay. So merchant vessels.
But however, similar orders were issued later with respect to the U.S. Army. And these orders, issued in December of 1944, said, quote, no action will be taken that is predicated on membership in or adherence to the doctrine of the Communist Party, unless there is a specific finding that the individual involved has a loyalty to the Communist Party which outweighs his loyalty to the United States. So, and I wrote, unquote, how this comparative weighing of mental states was to be arrived at was not explained, nor could any such mind-reading feat well be imagined. So, absent any overt act of treason, bring the communists in, get them in, and they did get them in, and that's what Lansdale was talking about.